All right, we got Guy Macpherson here with the Trauma Project, correct?
Trauma Therapist Project.
Trauma Therapist Project, man. And yeah, man, thank you so much for being here, man.
You're welcome, Jake, man. Thanks for
Awesome.
having me.
You're out of Oakland, right? Oakland, California?
Yes.
Wonderful, man. That's awesome, bro. That's awesome. So tell me about what got you into this, man.
Yeah, that's that's the question right there. About well, 10 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer than that, I was writing fiction. And my brother had been in the service, was in the service at that time. My father had been in the service.
Mhm.
I was sitting in my sister's house in Los Angeles, actually. I was finished for the day. Out of the blue, I get this phone call from a friend of mine who I had worked with um, about a year earlier. It turned out that she was calling all of her friends to tell them that she had AIDS, and she had been living with AIDS for about 9 years at the time. And basically, she was calling people to say that goodbye.
Mhm.
And man, the strength that this woman had, the courage that she had in talking about this, I got off that phone, Jake, and I was like, there's no way that I have that courage, that I have that strength. And it was like this, I kind of describe it like this flaming telephone pole through my chest,
Yeah.
waking me up and revealing the pit of lack of courage, lack of strength that I had. And at that point, I decided that I needed to find that for myself. So that kind of set me off on this journey, and I started doing these courses like Outward Bound. I did like this Vision Quest, and I needed to find my strength and my courage. And one of the things I did was this survival course out in Boulder, Utah. It was out in the Canyonland regions, and I am not a wilderness person at all. I'm like completely out of my comfort zone, but that's what I needed. I felt that I needed to do for me. So on this trip here, and stop me if you need to stop me, because you just hit me off and got me going here.
No, I'm listening, man. This is all you. This is all.
Okay. Okay. So on this course, which was this 2 week survival course, you're out there with like 12, 13 other people. There were three guides who were just amazing. The first 4 days, there's no food. You have water, but there's no food. And you're hiking, and people are getting sick and dehydrated, but within safe
Yeah.
zones. One guy actually started getting really sick. He started hallucinating. He got really dehydrated. And the guides kind of kept back, because what happens is, we only find this out later, they're waiting for the other members to step up.
Oh,
And I was one of these people who stepped up with this other girl, this other woman, and we helped this guy. We like inspired him, we encouraged him, we dragged him. And that was the point that I was like, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to help people who are basically in dire situations. So being that I had dropped out of school, college, after 1 year, I had to go back and get my BA. I went back to graduate school and to get my degree in clinical psychology. And around that same time, my brother came back from Iraq. He was in the special forces. He came back jacked up with PTSD. And then after that, I had gotten that job that I was telling you about before we started recording, in this clinic
yeah.
where we were assessing and treating kids showing early signs of psychosis. And you get these phone calls from these families and therapists about these kids. And you're like, what the hell is going on? So anyway, I wanted to start something to help raise the awareness of trauma, but also help other clinicians learn about it. Because as surprising as it may sound, a lot of clinicians either don't have the education
Yeah.
or are freaked out about it. Because let's face it,
Yeah.
it's freaky, scary.
It's deep.
Anyway, it's deep.
So much work to do with trauma that it's never ending. I
Right.
mean, I feel like that there's always something beyond that something, and it continues to be unfolded, And I think with time in your life, maybe I'm wrong with this, but I think with time in your life, and that's so interesting, man, that you decided to go to Utah and just do a 4 or 5 whatever day, 4 or 5 days, you said?
Well, it was 2 weeks. The first 4 days were no water, no food rather, where all this stuff happened.
That's insane, man. But
Yeah.
shows it shows that when there's nothing left, when you have your clothes and your home and your life is literally at bottom. And I'm
Right.
a big believer in how bottom is your gift.
Yeah.
With my story, when all that is stripped away, it comes down to love and
Right.
purpose and helping other people.
Right.
You know? And that's what I really gained from what you just said, because when you have nothing at all, we need holes in us, I feel like, to rely on other people.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think we need trauma in ways, in healthy ways. And maybe I'm wrong with this, but we need those things because if we were completely okay with ourselves and everything was perfect, I
Right.
think everybody's they're waiting to be a perfect person to then get started. And with these holes, you need other people. And this is a community, this is a world, this is a city, this is wherever you're in, and you're in Oakland.
Yep.
I
Yep.
lived in Oakland for 4 years, and East Oakland, and the community in Oakland is very strong in ways, and in other ways, it's very not, right?
Right. Right.
It's a broken system in ways too, but there's so much love there. But when you strip everything away, you then have to rely on other people, and I feel like people maybe they get a grandiose feeling or some sort of they think they figured it out because they have material items or they have the cars or whatever, and it's all an inside job.
Right. Right. No, I appreciate you saying that. This idea of, you know, the gift. What is the gift? And being able to see that as a gift. Sometimes that's hard for a lot of us because I think it's very true what you're saying. We're waiting to be perfect to start. We're waiting to be perfect because we're fearful to show those other sides of ourselves. That's a lot of what I try to talk about on my podcast is this idea of authenticity and what that means and why that's hard for a lot of us, why it's challenging for a lot of us.
Well, I think it's challenging. I feel like it's rejection when you are your truest form. You then have the real vulnerability to be rejected by another, and that is you truly being rejected because you've been fully vulnerable with somebody else. Is that touching home? You know a lot more about this than I do.
Well, but I think it's about each of our own personal experience and how we experience it. So, your experience is as valid as anyone else's, as mine. And for me, I think it's challenging because to be authentic means that we have to look at who we are. We have to look at like the hills and valleys of our experiences, the not so good parts, right? And the traumas, and what that means to us, and what that means to you looking at me. So, for example, my experience was being bullied as a kid, and it took me a while to even talk about that because bullied, you can imagine all the names people call you, but the fact of the matter is we each have our own traumas. And again, trauma is on a continuum, right? From a lot of times people think of trauma as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and you think of veterans being blown up on the battlefield or whatever. But there's verbal abuse, there's sexual trauma, there's bullying that all impact and can impact the trajectory of our lives in different ways. And for me, completely impacted my relationships, my self-esteem. But kind of getting back to what we're talking about, authenticity, it's like, for me to talk about that, I have to put myself out there, right? And then what are you going to do with that? What do I think you may or may not? That can be hard.
Very hard.
Yeah.
Very hard. And especially, I got bullied as a kid as well. Big time. All the way up until I was like 16. And also for me, it created this victim mentality within myself. And I started to bully myself. And I was really hard on myself. And I feel like our own minds can bully our own mind in a way, because people are so hard on themselves. And this is a journey, man, like everybody, I feel like for myself, I wanted to be perfect and this had to be right, and this had to be right, and this had to be right. But those things were impossible to become right without action,
Mm-hmm.
without actually seeking help and unfolding the things that I needed to become better, or the man I wanted to become, the man I was called to be, right? But with the bullying aspect of things, that's a big issue. I mean, man, we can talk about that issue all day. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
everybody who is bullied, I'm sure everybody's experienced some sort of bullying, and bullies are usually bullies because they were bullied by their fathers or whatever it may be, and they have their own trauma with that. But it's a horrible issue. But my reaction to it was I started to box. I was boxing at 17, and I was a skateboarder for like 10 years, and I was used to being beaten up. My nickname was Scabs. So I would take huge falls, and it was awesome. But once I started boxing and taking action towards something that I was like, okay, I actually have control over this, you know, and I got pretty good at boxing because I would use it to fuel things. So I feel like the trauma, if you harness it, where I'm kind of going with this, and all the combination of everything, but you're able to understand the trauma and what happened and realize it's not your fault,
Right.
but then use it because it's still inside of you to number one, help other people going through, which is what you're doing.
Yeah.
But also use it to empower yourself to thrive forward and continue to drive towards that goal, because whatever the goal is, you know, do you find that you do that with your whatever you've been through with that?
Yeah. I mean, certainly that's part of what I'm doing now. I mean, that's one of the things that kind of propelled me to do this work. You know, it's different too, I think, in the different relationships you're at. For example, if you're, one of the things I talk about and one of the things I do is help support clinicians, so social workers, therapists of all different kinds.
Yeah.
And you have to be very aware of your own stuff when you're working with someone else. Because, for example, you know, having been bullied myself, when I was seeing clients, if I was sitting with a kid who was bullied, the stuff comes up. Yeah. You know, you're like, whoa. And you have to be aware of that as a clinician. And that's where being able
heightened state, like survival, fight or flight.
Totally.
You gotta bring it down.
You got to bring it down. And in addition to that, if you're not aware of it, that can impact how you work with that person, what you say to them. You know, you might have a certain bias towards something else, as opposed to allowing that client to have their own journey.
Yes.
Right. But go ahead.
Sorry. Does a lot of encouragement and support come into that?
Of course.
Trauma is different than what I do. I do sober coaching, but there's a lot of trauma wrapped up in that.
Right.
Work through. So you're encouraging and helping, but you got a lot of, like, how do you transition that when you have things come up? What was like the first moment you realized that, like, you know it's going to happen,
right?
You're anticipating it, right? And with being sober, it's the same thing. You're anticipating these huge peaks and valleys and bottoms and emotional despair type stuff, right?
Right.
How did you handle that and anticipate it? And like, what was that? If you could just touch on like that first moment where you had to bring it down, and when you're embodied by this, it's difficult.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think you're asking really good questions here. And what it comes down to is, you know, and this is not unlike what you're doing, coaching and so forth. If you're in that clinical role, helper role, whatever you want to call it, you have to do the work. You know, if that's meditation or therapy or consulting with colleagues, that's where the work comes into play. And hopefully, with, you know, the different experiences you have with other clients, being aware of that, monitoring it in real time, right? Monitoring it. If you're working with a client, you're aware of your own state and what's coming up, and having the awareness to manage that. That stuff is, like you said, it is going to come up, but it often came up with me when I realized that I was, I could feel it. I could just feel it. If someone was bullied, I'd be like, okay, you know, and it's like,
yeah, You
It's
get
not
into like hyper wanting to fix.
right, exactly.
You know you can't do that, and you're very good at what you do. So it's like being able to pull back is actually a gift to them
Exactly.
in a
Yeah,
big way, but you can also use it to relate, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Relatability and connectivity and what we do
You don't
together.
need me for this, man.
No,
You're saying it. I mean, I
no,
think,
this is all coming off of you and
right.
your talks and your podcast. I love your podcast, man.
Yeah, I
So
appreciate that. I
having
mean,
this is stuff I learned from my father and my family. I come from a lot of mental illness and in the line and a lot of genius as well. I find that people with these huge seem to be flaws and maybe outcasted type personalities are the ones that bring the most to the table.
mhm,
If you allow them to have a platform and
right.
if you give them a footing or help them get a footing, but if they already have a footing, obviously, most of the most brilliant people in the world are coming from outcasty that no one understood them. Like Elon Musk will talk about, you have to be willing to be misunderstood for a very long time to
Yeah,
have significant result in anything.
right.
So that comes into play into being authentic too and finding that confidence and that getting in the pocket,
Mhm.
and that comes with a coach or a trauma therapist or somebody who has gotten that result. So when you're talking to somebody who's been bullied, that comes up, but you're the best guy for the job,
Right, right.
right?
Yeah, there's a lot of things here that you're touching upon that I think are worth teasing out. One is this idea of, help. What is help? I think
Right.
for if you're in a position where you're the helper or clinician or whatever, you have to be able to define that. Oftentimes with people in my field, there's a certain amount of education, if you're whatever, social work or whatever, there's this idea to accumulate, in a sense, you have to become educated into how trauma impacts the brain and body, right? But oftentimes that takes the place of this human relationship, the human connection.
Yes.
And it's very easy to get into this role of, well, oh, okay, this is coming up. This person saying this. I can, use intervention 232 on section 8 of this great book I read, as opposed to, again, being authentic, being real, and allowing the client or that person sitting in front of you to have their own journey. And someone said to me that when you do that, or when you do the other thing, when you try to fix or heal, you're disempowering the client. Who are you to take their journey away from them?
It doesn't allow them to change
Right,
either
right.
because you're trying to fix them where codependent relationships will come in and parents or siblings or whatever will try and come in and help somebody, but they've been helping them for 10 years on the same issue.
Right.
You need to take away the safety net, let them hit the ground, get up and go, we see you. They need to be
Right.
witnessed in their change.
Right, exactly. And a lot of times that is exactly one of the things that they haven't had, right? They haven't had, people who've been traumatized oftentimes haven't been seen. They've had that completely taken away from them. Their autonomy, their ability to be themselves, it's all been taken away and controlled. And if you're in a relationship with someone, if you're working with someone in that context, that's exactly what you want to give to them. And that takes time. That can take time.
But
Right?
you allow them to find it on their own. But that's where right? Am I?
Well, of course, yeah. I mean, you're stepping in there. You're creating a relationship with them that first and foremost is built on safety,
Yeah.
built on trust. I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to allow you to have your own experience, and that can be difficult too.
And going back, exactly. And going back to the book you were talking about with the scholastic learning, I personally don't like therapists. I just I know that they help people in a huge way in different categories, right?
Right.
And when you're helping children, completely different scenario. You are very much helping children go through these things. But therapy is good for, I feel like, a short burst.
Mm-hmm.
So then you can start to work on stuff. For me, everybody's different.
Right.
I feel like they go into the clinicianal way of thinking as well, like you just touched on. And that's why, because they'll revert back to a book, but the book doesn't teach them instincts.
Right.
The book doesn't teach them how to genuinely look at a person. That's a person to person situation. And there's amazing therapists. My sister has a master's degree and in psychology, and I know how much she worked at rehabs and stuff, and I know how much great work she did.
Right.
How many people she truly helped. So I hope you don't hear my heart on this. I feel like therapy is very useful, but action and having accountability partners who have results that you want is going to actually start pushing you forward and not have you magnify the past as much as looking towards the future and moving towards it, because we're moving forward.
Right.
We're all moving forward, but we have these traumatic things in these situations and choices that we make that pull us back and hold us back. And therapy is a great way to become aware of that.
Right.
Have a running mate. It sounds like you're more of a running mate with people in life as well, which is huge, man. I mean,
yeah, I mean, I think,
big.
it is, you're right. Of course, therapy is different.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, please.
Well, look, again, this is your experience. I can't correct you on your experience. I disagree to a certain extent with your your general characterization of therapy. I mean, I would say to you, you haven't found the awesome therapist, because therapists are, to me, a good therapist is someone who's in the moment. It's not dredging up your past for the sake of dredging up your past. Is that useful? Yes. But what you're talking about and what you're responding to is, for me, what makes a good therapist a good therapist. There's a lot of awful therapists out there.
Yeah.
But for what I've learned from doing the interviews that I've done with people who are passionate about working with people who've been impacted by trauma, is exactly what we're talking about, is being willing and able to be in the moment and to show up true and authentic and to be real. And that's difficult.
Absolutely. And right when you were saying that, right when I said, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it reverted back even to, and I got growing to do. The beauty about this is you grow, man,
Right.
But what just happened, I feel like too, is that's my own jaded experience, just like you were talking about before with the bully scenario, with you working with somebody who ignites maybe something in you, and you have to check that.
Right.
So I think that there's work to do on that as well. I find, like, from coaching, like, I have a mentor and I have multiple coaches who direct me in life, sobriety, finance, and for me, I find that having the coaches and the right mentors and people in your life, for me, I found out that it's based on the result I want to have. So they're already living that result, right? They already have attributes and results that I want, and they're willing to help me in that. And with me coaching people in sobriety, it doesn't always revert back to sobriety. It reverts back to habits, because they have the steps. The 12-step program is phenomenal. I practice the 12-step program, and it's allowed me to set the foundation necessary to move forward in a way where I have corrected my mistakes in the best way possible. I've made amends to people. I have found a higher power, whatever a higher power is to anybody. Mine is mine. And it's given me so much surrender and peace around this journey, and not trying to make sense of it, but becoming the best version of myself to help as many people as possible, right?
Yep.
And grounding. And I don't really know where I was going with that, other than saying that, oh, that's where I was going. It's around having the result. And I'm a very outcome focused person. And sobriety to me is just like a starting point. It is a lifestyle. But in the beginning, it's a starting point. You have to build that foundation, get past all the stuff that you did. It's a very hard journey. It's a very hard journey. With you, do you feel like having coaches and mentors in your life are key to getting to the place you want to be in life? And what's been your experience with that? I guess I could ask,
Yeah, I would say yes, definitely, with a big exclamation point in there. I think coaches and mentors are huge. For me, I've had a couple of mentors in the trauma therapy kind of consultation realm who've been super helpful for me. I've had teachers. One of the things that really changed my I don't want to say life. Like life really is, when I was in graduate school, I had, I knew that I wanted to study trauma. I wanted to become like this trauma therapist. And for me, I was like, just give me the book, give me the article I need to read, give me the workshop I need to go to, the conference. It was all of this external stuff that I thought I needed to take in. And what I didn't value as much was who I was as a person and how important and significant that is in doing this type of work. So what happened was I started taking some courses, some workshops in trauma therapy. And what I saw was these very seasoned clinicians who, part of the workshop was working in dyads, right? Working two people working together. And I saw these people who had years of experience. I was in school, so I had like zero experience, but they were being themselves. And I had this idea of me as like what a clinician should be like. And it was just so full of,
But you were forming the picture for yourself.
But it was a screwed up picture. Gotcha. Until I saw these people just being themselves and being real within the context of working with a client. I was like, wait a minute, I can be myself. I don't have to be some idea of what a therapist should be like. So what I'm saying is that really helped me. Those were kind of mentors to me. And this idea of empowering not only ourselves, but the people we're working with to be themselves. A lot of what I'm hearing from you, Jake, is really, I'm going to answer that by one of the things that I like to talk about is I think a lot of us think of the clinical relationship as like this fragile glass ball, right? And walk around with it like this. And, oh my God, it's fearful that it's going to break and it's going to fall and it's going to shatter, as opposed to this hunk of clay, right? That it's going to get nicked and marred and scratched. And it's okay if it does. Yeah. That's what I'm hearing from you is like appreciating these nicks and scars and scabs of who we are, You
need them.
You need them. Well, they're going to be there, right? We all have them.
And some are really gnarly.
Some are
pretty gnarly. Really gnarly. And that piece of clay, man, could be just covered in blood and needles and condoms and disease and horrible. I work with people who are going through a lot, man, and you do too. And it's like, I'm not a therapist. I make that very clear in the beginning, and I make it clear what my boundaries are and why we're here. What it's all about, where they want to go and where somebody wants to go. But yes, those scars, man, that's what creates insight. That's what creates your story. And
well, I think they're the opportunity. Right? Yeah. If we don't have the willingness or ability to look at that, then they just become like this cloud going off in the sky, and we're not harnessing that energy that they have. Right?
Yeah, and it's all about harnessing it. Yeah, it's using it because these things are happening to teach us something, and if it's not, and some people, I didn't have that viewpoint for a long time. I go, well, why is this all happening, and what's going on here, and why me, right? But how did that work out for me? It didn't, it didn't work out for where I wanted to go. It didn't push me forward. So yeah, these big hunks of clay, man, you're hacking at them. And I've made some horrible decisions, man. And I've looked back, and in the beginning of sobriety for me, I had to work through that trauma. I did that by going through the steps. I did that by going to rehab. I did that by finding people who exemplified what I wanted to become in my early stages of sobriety. And then I got a coach and a mentor who had the life I wanted. And that foundational work was so key in that. But like you said, it's not your story, but isn't it your story? I mean, it is your story, but owning it and having it, you'll have a different perspective if you're able to kind of separate, have a 30,000 foot view, have some perspective to switch that viewpoint, and then be able to compartmentalize it a little bit and not have it run your days. And, and that cognitive behavioral therapy work that people do, I find is very helpful. But what are your thoughts on that? I mean, that was a lot. But
Yeah, no. In terms of it being your story, I totally believe it's your story. I guess what I was trying to communicate was that, you were saying these things are what, opportunities or whatnot, and I think they're only opportunities if we're open to them. Yeah. And that getting to that point that you were at, where you were finally able to look at this stuff, can take time for a lot of people. A lot of people are like, screw that. That's an opportunity. No, was my awful childhood. That's not an opportunity. Yeah. But, for a lot of us, that's where the growth comes in, where we're able to kind of get out of that why me mentality and understand that shit happens to all of us. What are we going to do with it? Yeah. For me, I don't believe that things happen for a reason. I believe that we attribute reasons to something. I don't know why my mom died out of the blue 2 years ago, but what am I going to make of that? That's on me. I don't know why X happened or Y happened. Yeah. I don't believe that there's some reason floating around. It's me coming up with that reason. That's what I believe.
I like that because you are in control of the ship. The ocean's gonna do what it's gonna do. You're turning that. You are in control of the sails, man. You're in control. And the thing is, self-pity is the most worthless emotion in the world. And I've been through it. Anything I'm bagging on, I've done.
Right.
I've done and been through and felt. But man, when you're able to transition that victim mentality into I'm empowered, I can make choices and I can give reason for things to happen. I can attract what I want to attract in my life. And that is a whole different subject. Like the attraction piece comes with action, consistent action towards a goal. And it's being very focused towards that goal. I think people have gotten the wrong idea of the media and how they push the laws of attraction around and all that. I think you have to be very focused on something for a long time. And failing, I love failing, man. It's my favorite thing, man. It's my favorite thing in the world. It's your first attempt in learning anything. And your first attempt is always your first attempt because you've grown. Right. That was that first attempt. So now this is your first attempt as you today, so I like that, man. I like what you just said because it puts the control back in the person's hands. Everybody goes through stuff. I'm sorry to hear about your mother.
Yeah, thank you.
We all experience loss, and my father I was telling you earlier, he committed suicide 3 months ago. And him and I were best friends. A lot of issues, a lot of trauma, a lot of PTSD, a lot of, obviously he did something that was very drastic, right? And the opportunity from that is, I think this is what you're saying, making that a reason to grow, to become closer to other people, to try and understand yourself and the relationship. Because now that he's gone, everything has changed, right? And it hasn't changed in a bad way. It's just changed. So looking at that and going, what do I do with what's in front of me right now? And what's holding me back from the past?
Right. Yeah, I don't mean to trivialize these experiences. I mean, certainly your father committing suicide or...
I don't take it like that at all.
Right. I just want to make it clear for the people who are watching this.
Of course.
This... Can I curse on this?
Fuck yeah, dude.
Okay. This shit sucks. It sucks, it's tragic. But, we have to, I believe, move on. We have to what am I going to do with the stuff that happens in my life? What are you going to do with the stuff that happens in your life? Yeah. And I think there's also the question of being respectful for those people that we work with, that they have their own time with this. Right? It's one thing for me to believe that, there's opportunity in these tragedies and traumas, but there's also this other element of me being mindful and respectful of that person sitting in front of me, that they have their own timeline
Yeah.
for this.
But ones there I've met, that's very important, very important. But it's like a self-counseling thing as well. But like people, you can't fix the problem with the same brain that created the problem. Whether or not it was your fault, my fault, anybody's fault in the past, the problem is still living in us.
Right.
And it's re-firing off, right? And when is there, there's a time when everybody they need their time, of course. But when does it become like, somebody needs to kind of kick them in the butt a little bit and
Yeah.
just, you know what, man, I'm done. Let's
Right.
go. Let's
Right.
do this. That happened. This is over. Let's rock and roll. You've gone enough into this, because as you move forward, you're going to develop the skills to look back on it now and say, oh my God, my perspective is totally shifted.
Right. And that's a big question. And I think there's not really an easy answer for that. And I think,
It's situational.
it's what?
It's completely situational.
It's completely situational, and it depends. The answer might be different depending on who that person's working with.
Of course. And I don't mean to be insensitive either. I just, that was a question based on trying different things. So I don't mean to be insensitive to anybody going through something that's really hard that they're going through right now.
Right.
We're just talking about trying to figure out what works.
Right. Right.
So
It's to me, what you're doing here, I think is very powerful. I think sharing your story and the way you're doing it is really powerful. I mean, that in and of itself is so helpful. People need to hear what you're doing and see what you're doing and how you're doing it, and that's going to give people the courage to say, "Let me get out of here. Let me take that first step."
Yeah, exactly. And that's the beauty of our story. That's the beauty of that experience and that pain, and that's how you harness it and give it back to other people as hope.
Right.
You're recycling this trauma, making it hope for other people to look at, because whether or not they're going something, pain is, everybody's going through some sort of pain. We're all going through some things together, and you don't know what people are going through in their life. You don't know what they've been through, and that takes time to go into and divulge, and that comes a lot to trust. You have to build a lot of trust with people. I've become a much more trusting person, but I always wasn't. And I know that everybody has their own variation of trust, maybe issues or relationships or whatever it may be. But trust is key in anybody guiding you in anything. But I find that people rely on people that are going to just validate what they're doing, which kind of goes back to like codependency. They're going to validate what you're doing, and that's why you kind of circle around the same association, because they aren't challenging you. They aren't threatening who you are right now and driving you to become something different, right? Does that make sense? Like, your association is so important in your ability to change, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, that's right on the money there. And I think one of the things that, a lot of the people I interview, who are trauma workers, it's a different relationship. It's not a friend relationship where I'm just going to completely validate what you're doing. Part of the work here is questioning, being I don't want to say a mirror, but not just letting things pass by. There's a certain amount of respectful challenge going on. The big question here is, at what point does someone, you talked about the bottom being a gift, at what point does someone recognize that?
That's a great question. I mean, with sobriety, I can only speak on my experience on that one. Yeah, that's a great question. But yes, when is enough enough? The saying, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, that could come in all different ways in life. With sobriety, with finance, with my relationships, with my self-worth, with my action, with my momentum, with my consistency. These are all things that you hit different bottoms in, but with sobriety, man, for me, it was being on a 4-day meth binge, in Oakland, downtown San Francisco. I'm based out of LA now. And just lost, man. Wanting to go, just wanted to check out. But everybody has their own variation of a bottom. Yeah. So when's enough enough? And that's a good question. It's all situational, man. And that's a question to ask everybody in the moment.
Right.
Like when they're in it. Yeah.
One of the things that one of my guests has said to me, and it really resonated. And I think had I heard this when I was in graduate school, I would have thought that person was full of shit. But one of the things they said to me was, the job, quote unquote, of the trauma worker, in a sense, is to allow that person you're working with to have their own healing experience. Mm-hmm. So what do you mean? I'm not supposed to help. I'm not supposed to fix. I'm not supposed to cure. No, you're not. You brought it up, this idea of witnessing. So many of us as humans, we just need to be heard. We need to be seen. We need to be witnessed. And there's so much power in that. And
big time.
The ability to do that takes a lot of so many things. It takes a lot of, I think, knowledge, maturity, experience, being willing to hold my own biases, my own inclination to, but if you just did this and put that over here and put that puzzle over here, you'd be set. No,
Yeah, it's true, man. That's
so,
true. And because what people need to, you're like, I know. And that's very difficult, but that's where wisdom comes in and patience comes in on the person's end who's guiding them,
Right.
And that's the beauty about helping and serving people and allowing people to go through it, just witnessing them. That's why we live together. That's why we have communities, and that's why, we need to be seen and witnessed, and, and that's why the social media scene is just a joke. Oh my gosh, man. It's insane. I'm on Instagram, but not on any other social media, because it's a false perception of people in their lives, and they're putting up the best of that day, and they're putting up a picture and a facade, and they aren't being authentic. I like the guy who's literally like, is darked out, taking a picture, a selfie, and you can tell he doesn't do it often, but when he does, it's real weird and creepy and awesome. That's the type of dude I want to talk to. You know what I mean? The guy, or the woman, it's like, those are the cats who have the balls to put themselves out there in real form,
Right.
But guiding people in that is key. My mentors are very, 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 very straightforward about their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You can do whatever you want.
Right.
I'm not telling you to do anything. I think it's key to never tell somebody what to do, because from the beginning in schools are set up to create, a one way of thinking, the fixed mindset in school. And I'm talking for high school stuff, and high school's prepping you for college, and college is a wonderful thing. If you're going into the professional world, you need it. You need high school, you need junior high, and you have phenomenal teachers in these places that work their butts off, and they're in a system that's very difficult. Right. They are trapped in a system. They aren't being paid enough money, and there's all these issues with that. But I want to address just the mindset in school, and talking about like how that correlates into knowing, like learning to memorize and what to think, and taking orders and being there at a certain time, getting off at a certain time, and learning what to think. I think that this is just my viewpoint, but I feel like we're programmed to fail a little bit, because we're based on grade systems, and we're based on IQ tests, and the IQ test was created to vet the system. It wasn't created to vet the kids in school. It was created to see if the system and the education was actually effective. And then for some reason it got flipped. And the IQ test is now based on how intelligent that person is.
Right.
I didn't graduate high school. I got kicked out of 3. So I have my own experience and viewpoint of the system in school. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but what's your take on that, and how people are prepped to go into the world? They aren't taught self-worth 101. They aren't taught be a great dad. They aren't taught take action on this, and they aren't taught to create consistency in something that'll actually drive them forward, or dream building, or finding the right people in association in your life. And they aren't taught things that I don't use anything I learned from school other than reading, and I'm okay at that.
Right.
I read a lot now, but anyways, what's your take on all that? I could go on, and I have a jaded viewpoint of that from my own experience, but I've worked on it because I know, man, if people are going into that field, and my cousin's a lawyer and a CPA, and he needs school, and he's a great lawyer and a great CPA, and he cares about people, and he's charismatic, and he loves what he does. So that's amazing if that's your dream. But a lot of people don't fit into that mold.
Right.
What's your take on that?
Yeah. Well, in short, I agree with pretty much everything you're saying. I think that, from a very early age, I was just into music and I was into art, and I went to schools and I went to private schools and where there was a lot of competition, academic, and I didn't really fit into that mold, but yet I wanted to pursue that track, that mold, to the detriment of myself. So here I am now, having gone to graduate school, and I'm using a lot of what I did, but I'm doing a lot of other stuff. I'm bringing in all this creativity that I had from such a very early age that didn't get out. Let me put it this way. I wish it gotten more kind of encouragement. I mean, I think, who was it? I think Picasso said, kids are born like creative geniuses, and it's educated out of them through the system. And it's true. I totally believe that. And like you said, unless you're going to become a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, or an engineer, there are certain things for which you need to go to school, to graduate school.
For a very long time.
A lot of this other stuff, you don't. They're not teaching us how to interact and confront and to be authentic. And a lot of that can be learned in a lot of different ways. Who's the guy who, oh man, he wrote a book, I think, called Bold. And I forget what his name is. But he's just one of these really forward thinkers. And he talks a lot about, for a lot of us, going to school education is changing. The educational model is changing. And a lot of times people are not going to need to go to college to do the work that they're going to need to do.
Yeah.
And to me,
it holds them back. I feel like I feel like it holds them back big time, because they put everything in a box.
Right.
Nothing is in a box. Everything is gray. There's no black and white. Everything is a gray area. You know what I mean? And people leaving school. We're engineered for success. We're programmed to fail, but we're programmed to feel shame about failing.
Right.
Success is failing 80% of the time. You have to fail 80% of the time, 90% of the time, over and over and over and over and over, to then be good enough to have a result. Right?
I agree. And unfortunately, that's another one of those things where a lot of us, it's built into us not to fail, because failing means it's negative. And what happens if I fail? You see me fail, you're going to have, I might think you're going to have a negative perception of me.
Yeah.
But to have that perspective that you have, I think is right on the money, and it's very empowering. And I think that's one of the great things that I want to teach my kid, is to learn to fail, to be able to see, have that perspective that, okay, that didn't work. Like Thomas Edison failed 999 times until that 1000th one, created the electricity or whatnot. So,
right. No, that's exactly it, man. You have a daughter or son?
I have a daughter who's almost 3 and a son who's 9.
Awesome, man. That's amazing. I got a daughter on the way in 2 months.
Oh, congrats.
Yeah,
buckle up, buddy.
That's a whole nother subject, parenting. Huh? We talk for hours on that too, man. No, but that's the thing. The system with work, be here at this time, leave at this time, and the environments that we put ourselves in, I think we don't think about things. We just do. But doing is what creates momentum forward. but there's a balance between the two. And I just feel like school, yes, a lot of things are changing in the educational system. It's a beautiful thing, man. But teaching people how to think, because it's based off an old model. It's based off the industrial age revolution, when they needed people to fill factories.
Right.
And then they started to fund those schools and just mass producing. School is a beautiful thing. It's just setting people up for success in life. School does not do.
Right.
It sets them up into going into debt, get a good job, get a good education, learn to pay that debt off, and then hopefully you'll get to the point where it's like you're rocking it. And if you love what you do, awesome. Keep going. We have to do something, right?
Yep.
But the failing in school, I remember being the kid in class with headphones, but I didn't have a Walkman because I couldn't afford it. So I just had headphones with the thing in my pocket, and I would just be sitting there, and they would be like, "Are you going to work today?" And I'd be like, "Nope." And they'd go, "Okay, go to the office." And I'm like, "Okay." Failing for me, I got very good at being seen as a failure as a kid. And I think that burned into me as it was the wrong or false notion of pride, right? I had a sense of pride around it with a rebellious attitude, and it hurt me in a lot of ways. But then going into, once I got mature enough, and I still have a lot of growing to do, it served me in a way where it's actually, I don't care what people think about me. And how has that affected your growth? And I want to touch on, like, when you're looking at failure and people's perception of you, and where you maybe think you should be at times, but you're grateful and know where you're at and you know where you're going. How does that all kind of correlate with you, man?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Hope that makes sense. Did that make sense?
I think so. Let me give you a shot at an answer. You can tell me if it makes sense or not.
A lot there. I tend to do that.
But I think, no, that's a really good question. And it's a very timely one too, because here I am, having gone to graduate school, got a doctorate, and in a sense, one could say I'm not using it. I'm doing something. What are you doing? You got a podcast and you're doing this online stuff. And that took a lot of, and it's still honestly something I'm still kind of getting used to. Like, what am I doing? I kind of feel like I'm not fitting in the mold, right? I'm not in private practice. I'm not seeing clients. I'm doing this other stuff.
And you could do that.
I could do that.
You
right.
could jump right in and start going, but you're doing your own thing. You're leading.
I'm doing right. But
it's done.
Right.
It's amazing.
Right. But I have to fully own that.
Yeah.
And I wasn't brought up that way to a certain degree, honestly. And that's where the rub has been for me, pursuing graduate school because what I thought it would be or how I thought it would be perceived. But really realizing that my calling is in a different and coming from a different fire in a sense. I'm still owning that. I can't say, yes, I've completely owned that. That's I'm a work in progress in that sense.
Oh, dude, we all are. It never ends. It never ends, man. And I love that. I love that. I really value, excuse me, that people take this investment in school. They're investing in yourself and in your future. And then literally 30% of people will work in the field that they went to school for, right? I think that's a statistic.
That sounds about right, yeah.
And that is literally everything that you've done, you can go into and just hit the ground running and rock and roll, but you're doing your own thing. You're leading yourself. You're practicing what you talk about and what you help others in becoming and doing. And I respect that hugely. Like that, to me, that's the epitome of a leader, because it's that you have to hit that fear in the face, man.
Right. I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
You got to keep it pushing forward, but you have that education and those degrees where you can actually fall back and fall into the divot and start rocking and rolling, but you're using it for a way where you feel like it's impacting more people. And you do, man. Listening to you, you know what you're doing and you know what you're talking about. And I really value you, man. I appreciate you being on this too. And we can talk about this for hours. I mean, really, I'd love to talk to you again, to be honest, man.
Well, it's great. Thanks so much for having me, Jake. I really, again, respect what you're doing and look forward to seeing your own process evolve.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it's going to be a journey, man. And what's something that you could talk to people about? Just the last thing to, what would be something that they can chew on after we end this right here?
I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is, you were talking about hope. I think this idea that there is hope, and especially for people who've been impacted by trauma, there is hope. The other thing I would say, it's a quote by the late Leo Buscaglia. He was a teacher at I think University of Southern California, and he talked a lot about love. He taught this love 101 class, and he said, when you're wondering about what there is to do in the world, it's so easy to get overwhelmed. Oh my God, what am I going to do? I don't know what to do. He said the question is not what is there to do, it's what can you do. What can you personally do? And you're talking about action before, and to me, there's a lot of power in that.
I love that. That's huge, man. Anybody who's listening, you all have control over this, over yourself and taking the right actions forward. And we got Guy Macpherson here, and it's been an honor, man. Thank you so much.
All right, brother, take care.
Take care, bro.